Hey everyone, welcome to Chicago Node.js. We're going to get started now. Sorry for the issues with the door. I'm still making sure that everyone can get in. I'm not sure what exactly happened there. There's food in the back. If anyone still needs a drink, if you just go this way, there's a game area, and you can see there's a drink fridge, and you can grab the sodas and whatnot that are there. Those are totally free. So if anyone's interested in speaking in the future, you just contact me. Either through the Meetup page or smass@groupon.com, or you can just come up and talk to me about it. We're always looking for people to demo stuff that they're working on, or just to talk about some package that they like, or some process that they found interesting in some way. So definitely let me know about that. Also, if anyone's looking for jobs, I know a bunch of people who work with Node all day at Groupon and outside of it, so you can definitely come contact me about that or anything else. But let's welcome Nicholas.
I'm going to grab the mobile microphone so that I can run around here and not have to stay tethered to the podium. We'll see how this thing works. Technology that comes within 20 feet of me tends to break, so maybe I won't destroy something here tonight. That's my hope anyway. So the presentation that I'm going to give you tonight pretty well fills my 30-minute time slot, and it's called Write the Code and Get Back to What You Love. And the title of this talk is very deeply rooted in my experiences as a single development shop, a single person development shop. A lot of the code that I write ends up basically going into production with nobody besides myself having touched it. And that's kind of a scary proposition, but so far I've been able to make it work all right. But I've realized that as a single person developer shop, it's really hard for me to disconnect from the code that I've been writing. I go to sleep at night, I'm debugging everything, and I don't want to be doing that. I have other passions besides writing code and this presentation. But let's get started. Who am I? I'm standing before you, and many of you I've never met, except for maybe a few people beforehand, so you don't know anything about me. My name is Nicholas Young. This is my Twitter handle, so if you have any questions or anything and you can't talk to me afterwards, don't worry. I've also left plenty of time for Q&A, but we can talk on Twitter and find something that maybe I can help you with. But what do I do if I'm not really developing? Well, I'm a radio host, I'm a designer, I'm a photographer. I say I'm kind of an ex-software developer because I really don't write code for anyone but myself anymore. And as you might imagine, I'm also an extraordinarily busy person with all of these various vocations competing for time. I'll leave this up for a second. This is where you'll be able to find the slides once I'm done giving the talk, and it's also where you'll find a lot of the source code that goes along with this talk. So hopefully that will help somebody. Just a second to get the notes down. But yeah, I love getting things done, checking things off my checklist. That is what is the most important part for me. In fact, this mic is not working out too well, so I'm going to transition over here. I also believe that tinkering is useless unless it teaches us something. And we can tinker all day. And if we don't learn something at the end of the process, then we've accomplished nothing. This maxim comes from my experience talking with a lot of developers who get up in the morning, work on a personal project, go to work on somebody else's project, come back home, work on their personal project some more, perhaps with their significant other. But they really don't get time to themselves. And a lot of this time, especially what they're working on their personal project, it's all tinkering. They're not really moving forward. And if I'm going to write code, I'm out to achieve one very specific purpose. To write the code, to get the logic that I need, and then get it out of the way. My passion really isn't writing code anymore. But before you completely boo me off the stage, I promise you I'm going to show you some kick-ass JavaScript before we get done. So what do? I make compelling educational radio programs that teach artists how to pursue and monetize their work. I think that's a pretty worthy calling, at least for me. And that calling about a year ago led me to start this broadcasting network, Machine.fm. And all of our programs are centered around helping creatives achieve whatever their dream is. For some people, that's starting a business. For some people, it's maybe learning how to write code. maybe learning how to be a better designer or a better citizen. So this is what we do. And when we started the broadcasting network, I realized that I needed a few very specific things because apparently, when I started my first podcast in 2004, everybody was starting their first podcast. 2013, the year that we launched the machine, apparently is the year to start a podcast network. Everybody did it. And we needed something that would really help us stand out. Number one was a completely kick-ass website that didn't really look anything like the podcast networks that had come before. My frustration was that anytime I would go to a podcast network, say Twit or 5by5 or any of these established networks, there was no information that I could gain immediately when I visited the show page. Maybe I didn't know the guest or I didn't know what this show was about. And I wanted to listen, but I had to really dig in deep. And so I wanted to build a website that was really high quality, really interactive, and showed everybody exactly what we were trying to do. So great pictures, easy subscribe links, host bios, all the goody. I also knew that RSS feeds, the backbone of podcasting, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with how the GUI backend of podcasting works, RSS feeds are really tricky. A lot of people are maybe distributing their show through SoundCloud or whatever, but those give you some really messy URLs. And for me, the URL is the defining factor of any application, and the URL should remain very, very simple. Humans should be able to enter the URL, not just machines. And so in our case, what we did was we made the URL structure completely mirror the site structure, just on a separate subdomain. So you go to the same path as you might go to get to the show, and you get the feed. And the number 3 thing that we needed was a really kick-ass, I think that's my word for tonight, kick-ass, a really kick-ass web player that would work everywhere. Because to assume that people are going to come to me to get my content, that's never going to happen. That is really audacious of me to assume that everybody comes to my little funnel to consume what I want them to consume. They need to be able to consume it wherever they are, regardless of what they're doing. And so we built this fantastic little web player that goes on Twitter and Facebook and also happens to be dog fooding on our website. So we consume our player API. When I started the network, I had about a month or so before I wanted to launch. And like a lot of programmers with perfectionist attitudes and deadlines, I went to Ruby, which is what I knew. I've been writing Rails apps since the first version of Rails. Wasn't a new concept to me. I knew that I could quickly get something out the door. But for me, Rails and Ruby together were not such a great match. I realized very quickly that Rails' new slogan should have actually been, beware, unmaintainable code ahead. And that's not to bash Ruby. I know there's a lot of people who get in this Node versus Ruby battle and end up bashing Ruby. Ruby is not a bad language at all. Rails is not a bad framework. But it didn't meet the necessary requirements that I had for my particular project. And here's why. Although Rails will let you build out things like service-oriented architectures, it doesn't really lend itself to that very well. You have your models directory and your controllers directory, and everything kind of sits neatly in there, and the framework works excellent, but then it, for me at least, got very complex when I started to break it out into different pieces. I thought, well, maybe I take and build several Rails apps from this one. That didn't work too well either, because I ended up having these massive code bases to do very tiny things. So in the end, I kind of gave up. But what really pushed me away from Ruby was a couple of things that probably will never bother you unless you're doing exactly what I'm doing. Number one, the runtime is still a little bit slow. You can solve this with caching to a certain degree, but in a lot of the stuff that I'm building, I couldn't cache. It didn't really work very well. I needed something that was able to take a high amount of throughput, do something with it in real time, and then spit it back out for the user to access. Number two, poor threading support. This is something that's not new, it's not unique to Ruby. Python's threading support kind of sucks too. But I really didn't want to have to either manage threads myself or wrestle with the GIL or the slow runtime. Because, I even benchmarked Rubinius, some of the bigger, more prevalent, optional implementations of Ruby, and it really didn't get the job done. But I think the biggest kicker was streaming file uploads. So we'll null out the last two. And this is something that a lot of people, if you're not concerned about it, you really should be. But I'm not knocking it. Ruby's awesome in a lot of different ways, but in my opinion, a lot of it also needs to be rethought. And let's walk through why. So this is a really common paradigm. File gets uploaded to the server does something with it, maybe you resize the image, and then you store the process file in the cloud. And even if you took that server processing, that middle piece, and you just said, well, we're just going to store it temporarily and we're going to shove it up somewhere. Even if it's just gathering the file and storing it, this is kind of a hard thing to grok when you realize that you can only do so many operations at a single time on your server because you've only got 16 or 32 or 48 threads, or multiply that by the number of actual interpreters that you're running. And still, it probably won't be enough to meet all the demand that you have. And this is a problem because everybody does this. Rarely do you push something straight into the cloud. Sure, you can do cores, and I've done cores, and cores is a great way. That's cross-origin resource sharing for everybody who maybe is not familiar. It's a way that you can upload things directly to Amazon S3 or Joyent's Manta service. But this thing in the background, that's by and large how people handle files and web applications today. And while this whole thing is happening, your thread is stuck. If you have 16 people and 16 threads and all of them are trying to do this thing, let's say it takes 30 seconds for your app to come back to say, okay, I've stored this in the cloud and now I'm done. You can't do anything else. You're stuck. And so while everything is happening in the background, your server becomes essentially non-responsive. People who use the web and web applications on a daily basis are demanding one thing, and it's actually not that hard for us to give it to them, and that is that the website doesn't freeze when they click a button, that something comes back immediately. This is the mandate that we're going to have to deal with as we build out the future tools for the web. So in my case, we had several users who were submitting large file uploads, i.e. podcast audio. The app would grind to a halt. We weren't even doing any transcoding in the background. We were just taking in the encoded files and trying to shove them up to Amazon S3, or in our case now, we're using Rackspace Cloud. But it doesn't matter where you're sending it. And why did I have this problem? Well, because I built a monolith. Because I did exactly what Rails kind of guided me down the path towards. And I can't say that I'm completely at fault. And I can't say that the framework is completely at fault. Like, there's both things. There's some fault in both places because I followed the golden path. That meant that the public-facing website, the feed generation, the embeddable player, the admin dashboard, and the media analytics package that I had written as part of this Rails app were all in that single box. What if I need to write a piece of code that just tweaks one little bit of CSS in the player? Because that's something that I find myself doing on a regular basis. I'm just trying to change one piece of that. Well, I have to do a deploy, and I have to restart the entire server. And so all of these applications go down while I restart. Okay, fine. Let's talk about real-time restarts. Tried that too. What if I write a line of code that, we've all encountered this, works fine in development, doesn't work in production? Another problem. I would much rather be able to lose some of these things, like the public-facing website, not super mission critical. Feed generation, mission critical. Player, dashboard, Feed generation, media analytics, mission critical. Because people have already cached my feed somewhere else, and if they need to get access to it, then they need to go through the media analytics system. And it kind of sucks. And it doesn't mean that Ruby was bad, but it just wasn't great for what I was trying to do with it. And I'm actually kind of glad I followed this path because there was a lot of people saying, well, Rails or Node, or which one's better? Well, the truth of the matter is, different use cases. Rails didn't seem to work for me. And now I've moved almost everything, with the exception of our admin dashboard, over to Node. And why? Well, in the words of Craig Federighi, it totally rules. I admit I was kind of hoping to get a bigger laugh out of you guys. It's like, that was kind of lame. Come back to me here. And why does Node work well for what I was trying to do? Well, because by default, it encourages you to do exactly what Rails does not, to build small applications that are interconnected and each tackle a specific problem domain. It's right there in the name. A lot of people are still building monoliths in Node, but they're not realizing that this is how it is actually intended to function. Believe me, I built the monolith. I failed at it. Built the monolith in Node, again, still failed at it. Built my application in tiny little chunks, worked way better. So what are we talking about? How does this whole thing work? There are actually two different classes of modules that I created. One is our CMS, our feed generation, our embeddable player, and the media analytics. Those are all separate modules. Then on the other side, we had our models and our config. And if you look at how these things are labeled, these are all applications. They're deployed separately, their dependencies are managed separately, and the only things they depend on are the models and the config. This is something that, yeah, you could have done it in Ruby, maybe with something like Sinatra, but I tried it. Had a really hard time at it. And I'm not saying I'm the smartest developer on the planet, but it sucked for me, and it might well suck for you. I'm not going to say you shouldn't try it. Sometimes you have to do the hard, stupid shit and learn from your own mistakes, not my mistakes. But Node made this incredibly, incredibly easy because it almost made it hard to build the monolith, to have all of these dependencies stacked on top of each other. The monolith that I built in Node was actually one base Express application, and then all of the other applications mounted as essentially application-level middleware. And it worked, and it was performant, and it got the job done. But again, I realized at that point that the problem wasn't necessarily Rails, the problem was me. Because I was still trying to build this one system that if I deployed it and I had a bug, the entire thing went down. And so now I can take all these different pieces, like the CMS. Well, it needs Jade. It needs to render templates. Great. The feed generation. Okay, maybe it also needs Jade. Embeddable player does as well. But the media analytics piece, it doesn't need that. And so I can think about what dependencies are needed by each individual piece and set it up appropriately. The only one thing that I would caution you against as you look at this is don't allow your model or your config layer to mutate. Because if you let it ingest a variable that comes from this side over here, you're going to be in trouble. Those models or those dependencies rather on the right-hand side should be completely self-contained. And why is that? Well, because the models, when you require it, you want to be in control of when it connects to the database. So do your database connection, do your application configuration, do all that on the left side, but set up the modules that just export properties on the other. This worked exceptionally well for the machine. We went from literally about 1,000 downloads a month when we launched. We did over 30,000 last month. It's not a lot of uniques. It's not a big blow-up Silicon Valley style success. But the fact remains that now we're using a lot less memory, a lot less processor power, and we're delivering not at 20 milliseconds, not at 120 milliseconds like we were with the Rails app. Sometimes when you go in to load a page in the Rails app, it takes 4 or 5 seconds. We're doing it at 5 and 10 milliseconds. And partly that's because I've gotten rid of a lot of the dependencies. But it's also made the stack a lot easier to manage. I am completely confident now that this is the way to build Node apps, and I'm actually working on a new project called Mixdown, where there's a lot more tiny pieces. And for instance, my workers, my transcoding layer, like all of that is a separate application that does nothing but just transcode. I feed it over a Redis queue, and I don't think anything else about it. But enough of that. I can show you slides all day, but let's talk about JavaScript. Who here, when they first started doing Node, realized that they thought JavaScript completely sucked? I see at least 2 hands back there. Surely there's more of you guys. I saw Node in 2009. I realized it completely sucked. I said, I don't want to write JavaScript. That's awful. And I realized, though, that the language itself didn't really suck. It's just that the ecosystem still kind of did, and a lot of things had to, catch up. So Ruby's been going at this since like the early 2000s, and so to transition like that, I realized that I had to kind of throw away a lot of the stuff that I knew and not depend on the existing tools, and sometimes, in this case, kind of make my own. And I will say, writing a Node application, or a Node module rather, is a lot easier than writing Ruby gems or Python eggs, because the community has, I don't want to say they've officially codified it, because they haven't, but the smaller a Node module is, it seems the better it's received. Like, it should do one thing, and do that one thing exceptionally well. Like, they subscribe very ferociously to build big things out of tiny things. And it's actually taught me a lot, and it makes it really easy to just kind of crank out a module when you see a need. So I'm going to show you 4 little modules that I built that helped me along the way towards this kind of new non-monolithic architecture, and it's called Distill. We're going to show you Earbot, Enforcer, and Apogee. And despite the fact that I have never seen live coding go well for any presenter, I'm going to attempt it. Let the code gods be with me. So can all you guys see that all right? Or do I need to make it bigger? Make it a little bigger. Just try to help the people in the back if you have poor eyesight. I know I do. So the first module that we're going to take a peek at is Apogee. And what it does in a nutshell is it allows you to very, very easily build a versioned API on top of Connect. Now, there's this other little framework out there called Restify. Restify is great. It's awesome stuff. I love it. Mark Cabbage, the guy who wrote it, I know is a complete and total Node genius. He's way smarter than I am. But a lot of us are not really ready to use Restify just yet. So we're still using Express. And we need to maybe offer a versioned API, because that's kind of what Node was built to do, to build these API-driven applications. And so in my case, you'll see here, I've got basically a bare bones Express app. I'm going to use Apogee config. I'm going to pass in the optional header parameter, and I'm going to tell it what version it should default to. And this is really important, because sometimes your apps talk to each other through the database, in my case, but on this new project that I'm working on, everything talks across HTTP. And I want to put a version at HTTP if I possibly can, and this is what the tool looks like. So let's start up a server real quick. And we've got the default version of V1, and I've got 2 routes, widgets, and you'll notice that I actually redefined the same route down below. So we're putting the limiter on each route. We're going to limit this one to version 2. We're going to limit this one to version 1. And notice, like, version 2 is first. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do curl x or dot sh. Yeah, y'all watch me fail at using curl. Typing, that's not bad too. And so I'm going to specify v1. And you can put this in there as a string. It doesn't care. Like, it assumes, though, that you are going to send exactly what you want from that API. Maybe in the future I should do some fuzzy matching. And because I sent version 1, even though version 2 is defined first, I get the response back, hello from version 1. Let's take a look at one of the other things that I wrote. Are any of you using Mongoose to manage your database connections? Okay, Mongoose here pretty much all the way. This is why I wrote this. Sometimes Mongoose transforms really don't do exactly what you want to do. And for the uninitiated, Mongoose transforms basically allow you to take the document and do things like transpile underscore ID to just ID. I don't know why MongoDB decided on underscore ID, but the rest of us are left fixing it. So in this case, I can have either an array or an object, and I can literally say, here's all my data, and then I can run it through distill, say I want the field ID, I want the field title, I want the field image, but this is what I want the source to be. And I want to pull back from the owner object, I want to pull back the ID. And if I run that, I get back this nice, clean JSON object. This is actually in production not only on my stuff, but on a couple of other Node websites as well. Peter Cooper and the Node Weekly team liked it enough they picked it up. So I don't know where all this module's at, but it's in a couple of different places. Enforcer, I don't actually have a demo for you because that would be kind of hard to do SSL on the laptop. But this shows you just how easy it is to use these Node modules that you build. And essentially, Enforcer says, hey, if you're in production, don't let us connect with anything other than SSL. I built this module in 5 minutes, perhaps, because we were integrating with Twitter and putting our player on there, and they want you to basically redirect to SSL. And I said, okay, fine. So if you just require Enforcer, drop that in your app.use, and all of a sudden, you're talking SSL. And then one other module, this is probably the most interesting thing. Have any of you guys seen Boom by Aaron Hammer module out there? Okay, everyone's quizzical, so I'm assuming not. One lesson that you're going to really quickly learn in Node, if you haven't already found it, is never, and I mean absolutely never pass anything to an error callback besides an actual error. If you don't pass a JavaScript error object, it's going to blow up in your face. And those are not fun. So I got really frustrated with trying to build custom error messages every time I wanted to do something in my web stack. And so I built this little module called earbot. And it gives me what is essentially a bunch of shorthands. So if I've got this app running and I hit Route 404, so I'll just quickly bring up a browser. No, not chess. I recently put a new OS on this computer, and Alfred hasn't got used to everything yet. So if I hit URL 404, you'll notice that what I get back is an actual 404 message. If I do that in curl, curl-v, I get back an actual 404. And all I had to do was literally pass earbot not found straight into the error callback. I can optionally pass a message. In this case, I just put page not found. But you also can do something that's kind of neat. And you get this earbot, error option as well. You basically just tell it what kind of error you want, and it actually maps directly to all of the known HTTP error messages. So you don't know what a conflict is, don't know that's a 409, well, don't worry, earbot.conflict, done. Proxy auth required, earbot.proxy auth required. The API is standard, you don't have to worry about it. But the cool thing comes in when you start dealing with things like database validations and you want to pass some sort of custom data down. This is actually something that I encountered, 2 or 3 days ago. And so I built it into the library. And so in this case, if I hit Route 409, let's assume for a second that 409, that conflict error, is going to be generated by something failing to save. Oh, you took somebody else's email address. Can't let you do that. So let's make a call to 409 and see what we get. Aha! Status conflict, code 409, And we get back all of this custom data. So now you can tell your user exactly what happened and map it back to the fields. This is something I've been wrestling with in my Angular Express application, and I want to be able to tell people exactly what didn't validate. Because as people begin to expect more of the web, they also expect more from us as well. To tell people, your username or your password didn't validate, sorry, pick another one. That's a cryptic error message I ever saw one. I can't figure it out, and your user certainly can't either. If you don't want to pass a name, don't worry about it. Just pass a name. And literally, this is like, that's as simple as your error handler can be at the bottom of your stack. Completely, almost like brain dead simple. You could be a zombie and still use this library. But all those libraries that I wrote literally took me maybe a day, at max, half a day probably to write. And if anything, like, hopefully that shows you that you can just pick up this thing and go. And that Node is really as approachable as a software platform gets. So I'm going to try to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, but I'm also going to give you guys a few kind of maxims that I try to live by, and that Node actually makes really easy. Number one is prototype relentlessly. You live in a world of JavaScript. If you're writing Node right now, you live in a world where the language is completely dynamic. You're building big things out of small tools. And when something breaks, if you set up your code right, you can know immediately. I've recently started using Gulp, and Gulp is fantastic for doing things like build steps and that sort of whatnot. So I can prototype relentlessly. You can too. Push until it breaks, know where it breaks, and then pull back a notch. And because you're building big things out of small things, there's nothing that's going to break that you don't understand. I think for me, that was the biggest problem with these monolithic frameworks, is that something would break, and it might not necessarily be my code. And so I had no idea how to debug that. Well, because now I'm building bigger things out of tiny components, I know exactly where the problems are. 2, break before you build. I wish somebody had told me this when I first started writing Node. Otherwise, I wouldn't have seen it in 2009 and said, that completely sucks. But what I mean by this, break before you build. Understand that Node is not just another runtime. It's not switching out your Ruby interpreter for Rubinius or for JRuby or anything else. All those do have their weird problems. You're going to have to completely throw almost everything else that you know about programming out the window and start over again. Unless, of course, you're some sort of hardcore C++ developer, which I am not. And so you may be way smarter than me and know exactly how to use Node from day one. But you can't really translate all of these existing paradigms over to Node and then expect it to work. Number 3, ask yourself, what does my system do? This is a question that everybody should ask right at the very beginning. And then you can build the modules to help you get to that point once you know what the system does. But I find that a lot of people start off by just saying, I'm going to sit down and write some code. And that's great. I encourage people to get into it and to get going. But also ask yourself this question first. Ask, what is the end game? I come from the land of Cucumber, from RSpec, and all these testing tools that say describe everything and test first development. I mean, that's like the golden rule in Ruby if there is one. But a lot of people who do that don't even ask themselves this question. They don't think about the basic responsibilities of their application and the different moving parts and how they all talk to each other. Do this to begin with, and you won't build a monolith. And if you can, try to do it with Node. I think you'll be happy. And yeah, I'm pretty much out of time, aren't I? You have time? Do we want to take some questions from the floor? I can bring a microphone to people if they have anything. Oh, there is one in the back. Let's see if I can do this. Sean told me I probably shouldn't travel, but I'm going to anyway.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if your radio show is more geared toward designers or developers.
That's actually a really good question. I don't have a software development show right now, but it's something that I'd like to do in the future for sure. I just do enough stuff already without doing yet another show. Don't give me that responsibility.
Could you talk about deploying these individual pieces? How real time?
So deployment. In this case, right now, everything is running as a completely separate application in Heroku, and everything essentially sits in its own Git repo. The individual modules, the models layer, the config layer, all those are in their own Git repo. And I just use the Git URL functionality of NPM to just pull it straight in. Now, I could have put it on some sort of module management service, some sort of private NPM. That would have worked. But for me, it was kind of an extra layer of hassle because I was already on Git, and I knew that NPM worked pretty well with Git to begin with. And so I just use Git branches and tags, and we might outgrow that at some point, but right now it's doing a pretty good job. And that's one thing too, is because everything is in Git and it's versioned and all that, if one application needs a slightly more enhanced version or a different version from the other piece, well, then that's fine. Because the feed renderer, maybe it needs a new version of the models. No problem. I can just literally swap out the version that is pulling from Git, or from the tag rather, I guess, and then fire it up to Heroku. Now, I am looking for some other places to store this instead of Heroku, because I've kind of had some frustrations in the recent months, but when I do find something better, I'll go back and I'll update the repo.
Sorry, what was the isBot property that you had on the feed there? And also, I saw you were using Express, so are you actually using it to pump out more than one data type, since you had the same URLs for both your feed and your actual web links?
So you're talking about, am I using content negotiation in Express?
Do you have something special that would do like XML or JSON, feed, RSS feeds?
Well, the new version of Express, at least, I'm on 4.0, it has content negotiation built in. You just use res.format. In my case, there are two different apps entirely. So one is just spitting out the XML, and then the CMS is just spitting out the HTML. And yeah, as far as I know, the Express content negotiation works pretty well. But for my particular case, that was part of the reason of splitting it out, was like that each app could have its own dedicated infrastructure and spit out one data type so that I didn't have to worry about anything else. And I guess I could have used content negotiation maybe on the feeds app, but iTunes and some of these other podcast clients, they don't exactly send XML request headers. They just say, give me application HTML. And in this case, I just kind of made the executive decision to just basically send them probably what they were asking for and ignore everything else. Does that answer your question?
The second one, the first one was the isBot property.
Oh, right, earbot. Yeah, if you go to the repo, which I'll actually pull up the earbot repo here real quick. Basically, that everything that earbot, I really picked a bad name for that, didn't I? Earbot. I wanted something else, but it was taken, so. So I did what I could. So yeah, here we go. Make it big. Basically, all it does is just spit out property names of all of the known HTTP errors. But the good news is, if you wanted to do something different, you could just basically run it through this initialize method, and you could build your own custom error on top of that. Maybe you're doing CalDAV or you want something special, so you can build your own.
But the isBot property just represents that it was generated by this lib?
Yep, exactly. That's it. That's all it does. If you use Aaron Hammer's thing that essentially kind of does a little bit different version of this, he called his is boom. And I just said, fine, is bot. Works for me. It's getting fun. I'm getting my exercise today.
Yeah. So you said you had the persistence logic in the top level apps, and so I'm wondering where the business logic is. Was that in your concept of model, or are the models just empty data transfer objects?
In most cases, the model is just controlling what goes into the schema. And, if I feed it these fields and it breaks, validations, that sort of thing. The models are pretty well contained. I'll show you some of this. You might think it's horrible, but I'll show it to you anyway. So let's go to models. And then we'll look at, maybe we'll look at the show. So in this case, for the shows, I'm just basically storing what goes in the database and then handling any sort of validations on top of it. And I've written a couple of plugins and stuff, and some of these are open source. I'll put those in the notes afterwards. But it's basically just saying, hey, if this data sucks, don't let it in to the database. In some of the apps, there is a lib folder that does things like, making sure that if you sent an HTML string where you should have sent just a title without HTML in it, whatever, that's where I stick, the filtering and maybe you'd call that more business logic-y, because, that business logic, though, it doesn't have to live in the apps directory, or the lib directory of each individual app. It could have easily been put in a model or a module as well. So I guess the big kicker here is there's really no existing rule for this. JavaScript and Node especially are still very much the wild, wild west. And that's why meetups like this happen, is because people are still kind of fleshing out, what do we do? There's one way that Ruby code wants you to do it, and there's one way that Python wants you to do it. In JavaScript, there's really no established convention just yet. And not that I've seen, at least. And so we're still trying to hack that out. But in general, what I do is I have kind of these overarching pieces of middleware. I call them policies. And the policies are what handle making sure that we don't send something bad to the database at all. Because if I send an HTML string versus just, hey, my name is Nicholas, the database doesn't know. Database shouldn't know. If it matches that schema, it shouldn't care. But the policies kind of sit over top of that and say, hey, if it's valid, let it drop down to the next route. Does that answer your question? Is that pretty much it? Oh, two more. Okay, here we go.
Any experience with WebSockets?
Oh, that's kind of a vague one. Yes. We're not using it in production just yet. It is something that I'm tinkering with. It doesn't particularly have a use case in this particular app with the podcasting network and the CMS that we built. But it is something that I'm looking at for the future, especially the admin dashboard. And it's not that it's necessary. It's just that I'm a huge data geek, and I would love to be able to sit there and watch downloads trickle in from all over the world and say, oh, look, there's someone in the Netherlands. Oh, look, there's someone in Australia. So, have you tried doing the WebSocket thing? Did it not work for you, or?
I've used them lately, so I was wondering if you had any experience with that.
In my case, I'd probably, when I go to build it, let's say that. When I go to build it, seriously, I'll probably just drop in Socket.io with a Redis backend and be done with it. There's nothing radically experimental about that, but it gets the job done.
So which database are you using? Was it MongoDB?
Yep, everything's in Mongo.
Mongo. So you're not using any kind of ORM or anything for that?
Mongoose is actually kind of an ORM for MongoDB. Yeah. And technically speaking, you don't need it. The media analytics piece, it uses a driver called Monk directly. And, I don't need to know anything beyond, hey, do we have this episode? Hey, do we have this show? Like, if I just need to find something and then increment something, there's no reason for me to put Mongoose in front of it. But in the event that I need to validate something, or I might need to set up a custom query, or do some sort of logic in the database before I actually send the data on, then Mongoose is by far the best thing that I found.
One more.
Do it.
You said that your applications are like all separate. Each application is a separate app, like your modules or whatever.
Yep.
How do they communicate? Is it like over HTTP? That's what I understood, right?
So that's one thing that I kind of intentionally left out because it's sort of up to you. In the case of this next generation product that I'm building called Mixdown, everything does communicate pretty much over HTTP. The only dependency that they share is essentially the models. But there's applications or pieces of the application that also don't require the models. I would say that so there's a lot of people out there who are building applications and they're trying to figure out this exact question. And I kind of went through that process myself, trying to sort out what direction I should go. Should I have them talk over HTTP? But in our case, when you save something in the admin dashboard, you flip that publish flag to true. There's no reason for the feed generation or the media statistics part of that to do anything besides ask the database what the current status is. You can, though, build applications that talk HTTP. In my new app, everything is basically a great big honking API that talks to the encoders over Redis, and then the API talks to the Angular front end using HTTP. So what I would say is, if you can just require the module and get the job done, and just connect to the database or do whatever you need to do, then great. That's the way I do it. But there's also time to talk HTTP as well. So think about where you're getting your source of truth from. The Angular app is forever going to get the source of truth from the API. But the API has also got to rely on some other source of truth. And so for me, it's the database. For the workers, it's Redis. Does that answer your question at all?
Kind of. Yeah.
Kind of. You got another one here?
Yeah, why not?
When do you cut us off?
When the questions.
When you start asking me Kirk versus Picard, that's when I put a kibosh on it.
So I was wondering if you had any experience with what happens when a application becomes stale and then you need to somehow refresh it, how you can trigger that response or do it in a sane way so it doesn't interrupt anyone's content that they might be entering at the time, anything like that. For instance, you go and you change some front-end code, and I wasn't sure, based on what you were saying up there, if you just are building out static web pages with Jade, or if you actually have something that's building out a single-page application logic, like Angular, on the front end. And when that stuff, eventually it just becomes an application that never spools down. If your API changes and you have to update that stuff, and people are just not leaving the site, do you have anything in place to effectively refresh that without breaking some other existing logic?
Yeah. So you can correct me if I'm completely misunderstanding this, and it's possible that I might well be. But if the application, let's say you're talking to an Angular app and it's storing all of its state on the client side, you want a way to push into that application from the server and change something.
Sure, yeah. Like it could potentially reload other application code, business logic, whatever on the front end. Just, is it a complete refresh or?
I think the answer lies somewhere in between. What I'm doing is, right now a lot of the stuff is static. What I'm doing in development is kind of sort of exactly what you're talking about. And there is a time when state is on the back end and it's on the front end and the two states don't agree with one another. What I would do is actually what this gentleman was asking about over here, and just have some sort of heartbeat that you could send across a WebSocket or something. Maybe an HTTP push. Maybe you need event source, I think is what they call it. Maybe you don't need full-on WebSockets, but that's something that I don't think, honestly, a lot of people have really addressed, but you'd have to have some sort of like push status. Beyond that, just expire your cache on the back end and have it send you new stuff. But that, again, pushes the onus back onto the client, which kind of sucks. And it doesn't seem like it's exactly what you're after. I think it's right behind you, so I won't run over there. I'll just let you pass the baton.
So I've had very little experience building Node apps, but I like what you're talking about in terms of the monolith. Can you give us a sense of, is there any kind of like sign you're writing code that might indicate that you're building a monolith versus going down the wrong or right path?
So you basically need a Node doctor to say your code sucks. Fix it.
Put in a more eloquent way, yes.
Sorry, I don't do eloquence. I just make noise, and apparently people listen sometimes. In my case, the signs that I was rebuilding the monolith was actually that it became really, really difficult. One of the things that I saw pop up time and time again when I was building this kind of second monolith in Node was that I was doing a ton of absolute requires. So you ever seen people who write a module and they say require, / // .. That's a bad idea. If you must do that, then section off yourself a vendor folder and chunk your packages in there and use npm link. That works. I'd say that's probably the first kind of signal that you're building a monolith, is that you're just requiring shit from all over the place and you've locked your code down to a certain directory structure. You should be able to, relatively move things around, with the exception of a few key directories, and not break anything.
Does it require go recursively upward?
I'm not particularly certain. That's one thing you should probably go read the docs on. But yeah, just think about how everything is tied together. And if you sit yourself in a position where if one thing could go wrong in your app, and then everything else breaks, regardless of whether it depended on that direct feature or not, then you've built a monolith. And in my case, I could write a piece of code that might accidentally break that one piece of middleware that was serving up the front-end website, and it explodes in my face. And when that happens, I said, wait a minute now. Because if I break the main CMS, well, it's not good, but it's not terrible either. There's a lot more mission-critical stuff that I don't need to break. And so if you find yourself in a predicament where you're just breaking stuff that really doesn't need to be broken, and the change that you made was not related to the code that's broken, I think that's probably sign number 2. And I know that sounds simple and stupid, but,
That's pretty accurate. Encapsulation versus the ripple effect,
yeah. And that's one thing that Node is extraordinarily good at. Everything is a module. And it's no lie. Like, if you can put it in a module, do it. Be done with it. Put it on Git, use your private repositories and just load it up.
I think the biggest challenge I've had is, I've worked with Facebook, and I'm trying to make certain calls, trying to basically push those calls away so that they're not scribbled all over my code.
Yeah.
A central module for them, and then kind of working with the whole callback structure of Node, and trying to figure out how I can use promises to get around that.
Yeah, promises are definitely really good. And to your point, one quick thing that I will throw out, it's something I wrestled with when I first started writing Node, was I thought that I had to absolutely require everything. So if I had a database module, it would export Mongoose. And I realized very, very quickly that was kind of a weird way to go about things. And so let's say that I have, module A, and then, another piece of code that also depends on this particular module. If I have a script over here that starts, it requires module A, and module B also gets required after. Because Node caches all of those requires, I can actually just say, okay, the init script requires Mongoose. all these controllers require Mongoose. The init script comes up and it says, Mongoose, do the setup, require the controllers. In the controllers, I just require Mongoose because it's going to literally not require it again, but just point back to the original pointer. And so once you realize that, then all of a sudden you can do wildly decoupled things that you didn't even think about. Are we done? Cool. So, well, I have broke the projector apparently. Blew it up. But yeah. So there's all my goodie. Tweet me, send me an email, whatever, and of course I'll hang out later on to ask or answer all of your deep technical wonderings. That's it. Let me get out of your way, Brian. I'm sorry for hogging all your time.
Oh, that's cool. Can you pass that to Sean?
I just hope the setup here likes Windows. I got an HDMI port.
We can do some of these.
See, there's an HDMI right here, but I don't know where it goes. Alright, cool.
Yeah, those are hard.
There we go. Oh, it's up there. Cool. Just trying to connect. Username, password. Wrong one. Opal. Alright, cool. Just give it a second, it's loading up. Okay. I didn't see it. Okay, hello everyone. Brian Jimolo here, and I'm going to be going over Sales.js. Just going to do like a demo overview for you guys so you guys can understand what it is. I found Sales a couple months ago by a mere accident. I was on my desktop computer and I had a wireless keyboard, so I was going to look up come sail away, and usually when I do that I just type in sales and then like come sail away, but it stopped at sail, like my keyboard was dying, so it just put sail up there, and then it showed sales for Node.js, and I was like, what's this? I guess Google's stalking me a lot, so I was like, hey, maybe he'll like this, so boom. There's just some information on me. Just a picture. My Twitter. I work at Wava Media. I'm the web director there. So we're a digital marketing agency. We do websites, photos, videos, all sorts of things. So features of, whoops, I went back, but here's like some crazy features of Sales.js. Sales.js, it's a framework built completely in JavaScript. One of the huge problems that was out there for Node, and I still kind of sort of see it, is a lot of people are building everything from scratch every time. We may jump on Express and then we go, okay, let's grab a little bit of this, let's grab a little bit of this. But a lot of times we need something production ready to code right away and really fast. And this is something that Sales provides for us. It is auto-generated RESTful API feature, so you could quickly create an API based off of the models and controllers that you have. So it's just boom, nothing in there, and it'll just work. One really cool thing that I see this framework work really well with, if you just want to like, let's test out an idea, is if you hook it up and you want to use an actual database, because they have a development database called Disk, which will just kind of like Mongo. It's a NoSQL database, and you just shoot it in, and you can play with it however you want. It's front-end agnostic for the sense that sales will come with the front end if you want it, but if you don't want it, you could completely delete it and go with whatever you want, whether that would be Angular, Ember, CanJS. So choose whatever you want. It has WebSockets built into it from the start so that you could listen to all your models and then it'll just emit them and broadcast whatever's going on all each updates. They have a extensive API going, so if you want to listen to certain calls and do other things with it, you can. Any database, it works with the Waterline OEM, and this is by far what I find amazing. It lets you do like cross-database associations, and I'll show you guys that a little bit later. I really love that fact because I could hook up MySQL, Mongo, or Redis, and it just works. That's where I also put on there insane associations, because I never thought it would be easy just to go back and forth between a Mongo or MySQL database. It was like, wow, I love this. Flexible access pipeline, similar to pick kind of like your own style of how you want it. This framework is huge on convention over configuration, but you could, if you really want to, you could configure your system how you want it and still work with the same conventions. And coming from like a PHP and Rails background, it kind of meant a lot that I could change things around, because from PHP, I had a background of, okay, let's code it however we want. And then I went to Rails where they're like, it's one way or the highway. And I was like, yeah, I guess that's why I'm sailing away now. It does a lot of JSON for its requests if you want to do it in API style. I have not tried XML, but looking at like, I was looking at one of the files the other day and it looks like it supports XML. Like if the platform or web browser doesn't support it, it'll fall back a few steps on its sockets and how it handles them all. It's built upon Express.js. It's not on Express 4, it's still on Express 3. And if some of you guys are worried about the Connect middlewares and such, that multi-part, it doesn't use it. Instead, they have a different module they use called Skipper to deal with all the file uploads and such. You could use it with Grunt. It has it built in. So if you're using the default asset pipeline, you could just toss in files and it'll auto add it to your template. You could use Less or Sass, and it has tons of more kind of features to it. But I mean, I'm not a crazy presentation guy with PowerPoint, so I just like showing code and building things. I hope you guys appreciate the same, so I'll show you some cool stuff. So, okay, so let me clear this right here. This right here, it just says new app, don't worry about that. I'll just go /user. Now this right here is my cross between Mongo and MySQL. So if we look over here, this is the basic layout if you just generate a sales app. It has command line features to generate and stuff. It has a cool little ship. So here's our folders. It's separated pretty nicely. You got API. It's for all your controllers, models, policies, responses, and services. So everything nice and neat. Assets, you could configure this however you want. It's just a static folder that you call your files and stuff to. The configuration, this is more like the heart of your application. You don't really mess with it too much, but it's like you start it and you could do things. So like cores for cross-origin resource sharing. So for your API system, let's say you don't want to share with everybody. Well, you could set it up to pick certain places to share or whatnot. You'd set what RESTful routes that you want to be going. You could also create extra actions and place it in there as well. So if you have a sign up action, you could place it in there as well and it'll access it. It's pretty cool how you could just change things. They also got request forgery protection, just a bunch of cool things. One thing I really want to note here is really cool is this local.js. It has a get ignore file and it will ignore this file. So let's say you got a server running on your production server and then you're here on your development server running it and you're tired of changing database stuff over, or oops, I accidentally clicked upload or publish and then I rewritten all our production database stuff with my local stuff, and then everyone's like, oh no, what's going on? And then you're freaking out and you gotta change it. Well, it won't do that for you. So you could have your local stuff, the server will have its own stuff, and it's pretty nice. This is also where I put my database stuff in here. So if I ever publish things to GitHub or whatever, people aren't going to mysteriously know all my database stuff. I guess it's kind of nice that way. You got your sockets. They help you out here by saying on connect and on disconnect, but you could put extras in here. This is kind of like its transports of how it'll start doing things. If sockets aren't working too well for you, it'll go down to HTML, XR, polling, and JSON. It uses an adapter called memory. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know too much to it. It just works, so I haven't had to question it. That's my little thing I do a lot of times. I'll work with it, and if it works for me, there's no need to question it too far, unless I really want to know what it's doing. So there's that. You got your npm folder. Here's all your grunt stuff over here in the folder called task. And then your views is your static views. Most of the time I'm using this with a front-end system, so I'm not even using this folder. But if you want, you could use Jade or handlebars. Community for sales is pretty cool. I'm usually on the IRC, so you'll see Jimelo II on there. I'm usually asking questions or answering them. It's pretty fun. So let's go over to, I guess, controllers. And I'm just going to show you how I set these two up. Oh, well, actually, these controls are empty. So this is just showing the RESTful routes, what they call in the config as blueprints. So your blueprints, kind of like if you're used to seeing these stuff in Rails, it's just RESTful API built in. Actions, this is where if you're doing something outside the RESTful, where right here, I'll blow this up. They put email. So if you got an email route, boom. You'll now get the get, post, put, RESTful configuration for email. REST, you could turn the RESTful API on or off. I typically keep it on because I don't want to write out a million routes. It's just not my fun thing to do. Shortcuts, this is something you'll usually turn off in production. What this does is it lets you do all your RESTful actions via get commands. Just type it in the browser and it'll do all your creates and stuff. Usually I leave it on during production so I can make sure my code's doing right, but then I'll turn it off later on because I don't want people just randomly doing whatever. You could set a prefix in here. So just like earlier with the different APIs and such, where you could have several sales applications running on and then set up one for each API. And then this right here is a convenience thing. If you like having all your stuff pluralized, you can. This just shows that they really enjoy having kind of your choice in the say of what you like in development. So let me show you the models that I got going on my ship. That's what I'm calling it. I don't think they call it, but that's what I call my ship. This one right here, I just called it Node. All it's going to do is I have a creator association here to the user model, which is right here. And it will auto validate this stuff for you if you, it just does it out of the box. So if I try and set, if I change name to integer and I tried sending it a string with text in there, it's going to shoot back and go, hey, this doesn't work. gives you a nice flash error message so that you could display to users. But over here in users, I pretty much said nodes here, and I just said the collection node via creator. So it's going to go over and look in the node model, and it's going to look for creator, and then it's just going to make sure, hey, is the model pointing back to me a user? And as long as those two are there, then this is like a one-to-many kind of collection ratio. So if I just go into the browser, jumping over here, I got Rock Mongo and MySQL. So right here, I just showed out all users, and instantly it opened up the nodes for me to show which users have what going on. I don't think this one right here, I don't think I gave it a node, but I'll give it one in just a second. So if I go over here and let's say I just want to take the first user, I do a /1, you just see the RESTful API, but I could go forward and I could just say I want to see the nodes, and then you just see the nodes from the first user, and then let's say I just want to get the second node. I guess not the second node. Actually, let me look at what numbers they got there. ID, oh my goodness, got some crazy IDs. So, guess it's crazy IDs for the win. And boom. I'll probably do something to change those later. You could set things up to auto increment if you don't want to deal with regular Mongo crazy IDs. But as you can see, you could go from one model and then access data from another model, and it just trickles down. Pretty convenient this way. You could quickly generate APIs to serve out to other people. Really useful for your front-end systems that all they really need is data. And if you really want to see how fast creating one goes, I'll just hop out of this. Okay, so this is my desktop, and if I do sales, new, and I'm just going to say app, it's just going to go create another folder on my desktop with everything in there. And then I could CD into it. Oops, CD app. And then I could just do sales lift and lift my sales and sail on a new ship. And then when I go in here, it just gives you the basic home page to it. But sales, one thing I really like about sales is you don't have to lift everything. If you really want to, you could also go into the console and I'll open up a console mode. It'll still launch the whole page for you, so you could still see the site live while you're going around in the console messing around doing things. Hop out of that for a second. Another cool thing I love with sales is the power of it could generate an API. So let's say I want to generate API user, and it's going to go through and it's going to just create a new controller with user. It's going to also create a model for me. I could just generate sales, generate controller, and then after controller, I could give it like different actions. So if I want sign up and log in, it'll create a new controller with sign up. It did not. Oh, I probably needed to put a comma in there. Let's see. I'll just create. Oh, I know what's going on. I created a controller called sign up. So let's just go book, and I'll just type sign up, just so it could do multiple actions. So there I created a controller called book, and it made sign up and login for actions that you can do. You could also do a model and then specify what things you want for it. So sales, generate model, and I'm gonna call it sandwich because we like food. And then we're gonna give our sandwiches a name, and we're gonna say we want like text, and then we're gonna say yummy for another one. And then we can make that like a boolean. And then if I go over here and look at what it generated for me, so if I click on sandwich, It's going to show name, type, text. It's going to show yummy, bowling. I guess I put a comment here. So it shows that cool stuff for you. I could go over and click on user. User, I didn't generate anything additional for it. This is just a standard API it shot out. If I go up and go into controller, I could look at book. Book created sign up and login for me. I did accidentally create a sign up one, which is login. But that's just to show you how quickly you could generate these for you, which is pretty nice. And then if I went over to /book, I believe that's the one I put. Oh, I gotta go book sign up. Book sign up. Hold on. Let's see my route. Book controller. Yeah, I got sign up. It's supposed to just show me JSON to just do sign up. I don't know. Login. Oh, I know what's going on. I gotta restart the server. I don't have it set up to. Actually, the server's not even started. Step 1: if you want to go to a route, start your server. Whoops. I'll just put this in the console mode for now. So if I go to book/login, it says to do login is not implemented yet. I could go to sign up, go there. I could go into my controller here, and I could do like book, create. And this is just so you could start seeing things going on. And I could just say name, awesome book. And then you just chain things going on. So I'll just console log what it inserts. See, what did I do here? Name, awesome book. Which I spelled awesome wrong. It's cute. Trying to see exe console log. Because I'm going to my book. I'm creating. Trying to see why it did not like my awesome book idea. Hold on. Here, I'll just use the user one real quick. Let's see. Okay, maybe it's because I did not specify the create route. I don't know. I've been working with this for 2 months. Just letting you know. It's really fast that you could develop in it. It's really fun. Well, I've had fun in it. So that's kind of like sales in a little nutshell of how you could do things really fast, do things in a command line. It took just typing like really fast to generate a simple API, but you could see how you could use this and make like really extensive systems really fast. Personally, in my outlook of how the future's going, I think sales is a really good framework because most places, they really just want an API system to do their stuff, mostly for the fact that soon one day we're going to have our toasters, and I've already been seeing fridges have applications on there and even Pandora apps, and they're not going to want to see XML all the time. They're just going to want to see something quick like JSON and understand what it's going, and they're going to only want to see one API set to work across all different platforms and devices. And this way you could quickly make your API, do what you need to do, and be happy. Any questions?
You figured out cool ways of moving through like stub data that you want to just like throw in a database. So when you're getting your, like let's say you've got a fixture and you want to push it into the API, you figured out a way to move through that? Does that make sense?
Just like you got preset data and you just want to throw it in there?
Yeah, so like you've got, you haven't built your forms yet, so you can go through and manually enter data, or you're trying to migrate data from another store and put it in your API.
For migrating data over, you could just easily set up like your model exactly how that API is, and it'll just integrate in. It's pretty seamless that way. As for like having a form generator, Sales at the moment does not have it because they're under the impression that a lot of people who are using it currently, they're already using front-end systems like Angular or Ember, and just having a form generator auto-generate a form kind of defeats the purpose of its API drivenness.
No, I'm just saying, like, if the goal is to be able to pump in data, you created a entry by doing a little command line task. What if you want to bulk consume a whole bunch of entries as opposed to going and typing? Because doing it one at a time or using a GET request is helpful once you've got a form and you're submitting it and it's writing into the.
Oh, you're talking about just sending like a huge JSON file with multiple entries? Yeah, you could just send the gigantic JSON to it and it'll just handle it for you. Because it'll just go, it's just built in to go form by form. So it'll look at it, you send it in as an array. So you just package the whole JSON in as an array, and it'll go through each JSON object, tossing it in one by one for you. Any other questions? Oh, I got one more other thing I kind of wanted to show you guys too. Let me open it up, because I know I talked about WebSockets, but I didn't show you. So let me go over here. It's just a chat app, nothing too crazy. But if I open it here, let's go and get my git bash going. Let's see, is that one ended? Yeah. So sales lift. I'll lift this. I'll get me another browser window open, new window. So localhost. It's get this going here. I got this on port 3.8. And then let's go over here. Let's do the same over here. And got the two windows. Yo. Update this. Bob. Update this. Okay, let's send a message to, Bob. And this is just, I guess, what they call like a private message. So then you see a message from Yo-Yo. I guess I didn't update this to show when Yo-Yo hops online, but you can still get a message from Yo-Yo and respond back over here. And the messages are just going through sockets here. If I inspect element, it includes socket IO. So it just says sockets now connected. And it's just shooting things back. I sort of just created this in like an hour. So it's not too crazy, but I could also create a room. So if I minimize this real quick. Job search, I guess. I don't know. Boom, let's minify this. It already shows a new room here. I could create one over here. Node. Shows up right away on the other side. So I could join the selected room. Shows room here. If I join, and it just shows undefined. Join selected room, job search. Let's see. Say hey. Scroll down. I don't know. New room. Let's join the new room. Okay. I don't know. This end is showing undefined rooms. It's kind of weird. Let's refresh this. Hey. I don't know. I still got work to do with sockets. But if I wanted, I could send hey another message. But yeah, it is simple sockets. I'm just doing simple sockets here, but you could do more to it. But just showing you that it could do with sockets. It also could tell you when someone disconnects. So Bob over here disconnected. But yeah, that's it to it.
So I looked into it way back in, I don't know, last year or something.
Mhm.
And one of the things that turned me off instantly was that in the initial example of some sort of video tutorial I was watching, they had URL conventions where you could basically create based on just hitting a normal URL point by typing in, a URL and hitting enter.
Yeah, that's what they call the shortcuts. That's where you could turn it off. They're not intended to be on in production. It's just so while you're developing, you kind of have a peace of mind that you're hitting the right conventions. So if I went over to the blueprint over here, they have a thing right here called shortcuts, and then you just set it to false and you can't do it. So if I exit out of that one, it's this one right here. So this sales lift, and then go back to this port, and then so this says awesome book. Now if I try and do user/create, and let's say let's do that. Did I not turn it off? Hold on. I know what's going on. This is a different folder I'm in because I created a new project. Let's go up to here, config, blueprints. There we go, this is a different blueprint file. Okay, so let me turn that off and restart the server. Okay, 7/user. Okay, so now I'll go and show you that the method doesn't work. Oops, name equals cookie. And it'll give you a 404 telling you can't do it.
Okay. And the other thing was, I saw there was also something in your initial phase where it listed out all the options that were available for cores, like all of them, which I find is like a common nuisance, since, in my mind, you should probably only expose the ones that are actually available to whatever that endpoint is. Do you have a way to do that per endpoint so you can say what cores methods are available just for that specific?
Yeah, in your models, you set up exactly what connections you want to have. You could set what you want. Like, it's really cool what you could do with the models. The models you could specify for your sockets what you want it to be watching, what you don't want it to be watching, what connection it uses. You could even set up which database to use. That's how I got my Node one. I chose it to use a connection that I made called Mongo, and then wherever the user one I made, I set that one up to use MySQL. But you set up all your attributes in the model. And if you want to have a global, then they have models. They got global models right here, global connections. Your blueprint is kind of with your controllers of how the routes go. So you could set up other ways of going around about here. Set up your globals. This is pretty much where you see your express middleware in the HTTP. So each of these configuration files, you just set up exactly how you want it, and you turn things off so that if you create a new model, people won't access things unless you actually specify it. They also have things in here for policies to do additional authorization and stuff, and different validations if you want to go even further and say, oh, this user needs to be an admin, or this user needs to do this, or clean up extra data.
Okay, so then the last question would be, Does it have anything baked in by default for browsers that don't support cores natively?
That doesn't support cores natively.
Like IE8 and IE9?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure about that. I know in most of the things that I see, it loves to downgrade and such if it ever hits, but I'm not sure if this one will. But this seems more like an API kind of setting, so it's whatever you're doing for your front end system for it, connecting it back.
Sure. Well, the thing with older IEs is they don't support all the verbs,
Mm-hmm.
and so those will like fail out even if you have the right course information there, because they'll just like do like get and post pretty simple things with a small object.
Yeah, it just has get, post, delete, options, head. I haven't looked too crazy into it. I don't develop that much on IE8.
Right.
I'm just being honest.
Yeah, most people probably should.
I'm pretty sure it has options in there because the company that made this, Boulder Dash, they use sales in production and they have an app that's been running for 2 years nonstop. So I'm pretty sure they thought of how to do that and get it in there. I just haven't found it or had a need to do such. I know when you're dealing with all the sockets and stuff, it will jump down to WebSockets, sending HTML, XR, XHR polling, JSON polling. I know in the past versions of Sales, they did have one for Flash, so it would drop back to Flash, but it looks like they've taken it out. But it had several methods of how it would downgrade its sockets to make sure that you still have the full socket potential in real time that you desire. Anyone else? Sounds good.
Have you ever done versioning of the APIs?
Versioning of the APIs?
Yeah, so you change something, you got like one broad one up that's exposed to a whole bunch of different services, other applications, whatever. You have to version it so that you can support that one and run another one at the same time.
On a single app, I haven't tried on a single app. Usually I would just create another instance of my application and run it so that it would just still run. But Sales, you could specify in each of the models the actual route that you wanted to continue doing. You could also do that in the controller. You could have controllers that have nothing to do with your model name, reference that model. And so, like, let's say I have a controller named Bob, and I want to reference the model named Chelsea. I could continue doing that. So in a sense, if I wanted to for my APIs, I could make an API controller saying API V1, and then have that access the necessary models. And then when I update, I just keep it there, but then I'll create API V2, and then call and use all the other models that I want to use. So that's how you would get your API model differences, and still keeping them all running and going, so everyone connecting is good.
I just wanted to show a couple of things before we go. One of them is that Groupon recently open sourced our .ci project, which integrates with Jenkins and GitHub for continuous integration. And this isn't specific to Node necessarily, but it does support Node. And it'll even support it just by finding a package JSON in your repository, but it also supports Ruby and a bunch of other things. And this is sort of the default. What it assumes by default is that it'll run npm start, npm install, npm start, grab Node version 10, and then like run all of your tests with npm test as well. And it's a really cool project. It also now supports Docker. You can give it Docker files, and you can actually develop against a Vagrant instance using Docker locally so that when you deploy it and test it, it's all using the same environment everywhere, which is pretty awesome. But it does support Node. It's on Groupon's public GitHub organization, which is pretty cool. I also wanted to real quick show this site called Ugtastic. It's UG-tastic, stands for user groups. Fantastic. This is a great site where Michael Hall, you see that he's the guy on the right, interviews a bunch of people who speak at conferences and organizes meetups, just to talk about the types of things that got them into doing those things, and just more information about those types of people. And it's really great. He has hundreds of interviews on here, so I definitely recommend checking that out and just seeing what people are doing. You'll probably recognize a lot of big names in his interview list too, if you're just interested in seeing what those people have to say. We also have a Chicago Node.js YouTube channel, and right now I just have 2 of the previous recordings. I just received 1 or 2 more I'm going to upload soon, and I'll tweet that out from the Chicago Node.js Twitter channel, but you can also subscribe right here. And I'm also going to add some like a cover image of some sort, but if you want some previous recordings, if you missed something, or if you just want to share one that we actually had, they'll be up there from going forward.
Are those the previous 2 meetups, or are those just 2 random ones from the past?
That's just random videos I found. Yeah, it's the previous meetups. Yeah, there's April 15th and March 18th. But since then, we've been recording all of them. I just have to wait until I get them back, and then I can upload them. So yeah, going forward, they'll all be there, which will be pretty cool. All right, thanks for everyone for coming.